Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and if you watch my channel at all, ever, or any board game content creator for that matter, then to some extent you're being sold to. You're a part of the marketing machine as various board game content creators cover board games, show you the new stuff, and then you have to make a decision as to whether you want that stuff or not. Now, this video, I'm going to try to keep this one a little short and to the point, although wish me luck. Good Lord knows I like to ramble. But around a month ago maybe, there's a thread over on Board Game Geek where it was talking about the nature of the board game content creator space and how it's all just a marketing machine. And I don't even disagree, although I wish context and reasonable points were made as opposed to it all being about extremes, because I think there are reasonable points, and I think that a lot of it comes down to people talking about the extremes. Now, in the description to this video is going to be my first attempt at responding to that, which I filmed basically around a month ago when the whole thing was happening, and I filmed that video then, did not put it up, and I'm only going to have it available in the description down below. So you can watch that video, but you have to choose to watch it down below. It's around a half hour long, and it's a more emotional response to the general frustration around these kinds of threads and the very one-sided approach they tend to take. Alternatively, you can skip that video and hopefully watch something in the range of 10 minutes, maybe. I doubt it's going to be 10 minutes, maybe 15 if I'm really lucky. Whatever this video is, as I go through some of the points, because I think there are reasonable points to be made, and I also think there's a lack of full understanding of just the way the ecosystem works. In general, if you are a content creator, you are an influencer. Which I hate that term, by the way. I despise the term influencer. I don't like the connotations it implies, but I probably don't like the connotations it implies because they're uncomfortable connotations. They impose the idea that you do have influence, that I just want to sit here and talk about board games, but ultimately, by talking about board games, I am influencing decisions. When I box a giant all-in full of miniatures, it makes people want that all-in, and they might buy it accordingly. When I review a game and I like a game and I talk about how much I enjoy it, it might make 7 people buy it who don't like the game and don't enjoy it, and they trust my opinions a drop less, and they've bought something that wasn't a fit for them. That's the nature of the beast. By being a content creator, you are an influencer. The larger your impact, the larger an influencer you are. I don't like that term, but it's true. And if you have an audience watching you, that means you can influence opinions, and if you are an influencer, that means companies are going to turn towards you to be a part of their process for how they get their games into the hands of other people. Whether it's something as huge as a board game table, which I've covered a few board game tables, and that's a big deal. It means I'm getting sent a giant board game table to cover. Or whether it's a cheap $5 game, it means companies are trying to get their products in the hands of, well, people who are going to buy those products, and they want people to buy those products, and so I just end up being a part of their marketing. Now, the way I choose to be a part of that marketing machine, that's a different conversation. And that's what some of this video is going to be about, the general nature of being a content creator. And towards the end, I'll cover my specific content and the way I engage that system. But in general, if you are a content creator, it doesn't matter if you're reviewing, by the way. You could be reviewing games, and you are still part of the marketing machine. You just represent a drop more risk. No differently than whether a publisher has to decide how much money to throw into Facebook ads, and whether that will be a payoff or not. They have to decide whether to send their game to someone who's reviewing a game and might give pros and cons, because that means there's a slightly more risk attached to that decision. But they're still treating that content creator as part of their marketing tools. And you as the consumer will see that. You'll see it more often different times. You'll see it less often. When I sit here and review a game from 4 years ago, it's not quite as noticeable. Who knows whether I got sent the game from the publisher, whether I bought it myself, but it's still part of the marketing machine, just whether or not the publisher is a part of it or whether or not it's obvious is a different conversation. Versus when you see 7 reviews drop the same day for the newest Kickstarter, it certainly makes it seem more like there's a marketing machine at play as they use these content creators to cover the games. Now, it could be a mutually beneficial relationship between the content creator and the publisher, and it could even be a mutually beneficial relationship between the content creator, the publisher, and the audience. There are different levers at play, as far as the different pressure points that everyone is looking for. The audience obviously wants the most transparent, blatant opinion of that game without any form of bias whatsoever, which tends to be very hard, by the way. Bias is almost unavoidable. The only question is which direction does that bias go. Something I've talked about in the past is there's always a motivation to be more critical as well, because to a certain extent people like seeing more critical, and that could build you up as a reputation of the person who's willing to trash a game. That's bias just as much as your desire to curry favor with the publisher. There's all these different factors at play. Bias is present. The audience wants something that's as bias-free as possible. Also, another thing is, I find it equally ironic how content creators are often accused of having spent money on the game, therefore they're emotionally attached to their opinion, or getting the game for free, therefore they're not like a real consumer. Like either way, you're not going to make everyone happy. There's no such thing as a bias-free review. Actual fantastic channel, has a review about has a video about the nature of bias. I'll link to it down below. Phenomenal, like 10-minute video about the nature of bias in these conversations. But the audience, understandably and reasonably, wants something to be free of bias. I don't think it's achievable, but I think the desire is reasonable and makes sense. The content creator is trying to do the best they can to make their own channel successful while balancing things like, well, success, as well as personal preferences, desires to be negative, not to be negative, desires not to hurt the publisher, but not to deceive the audience. There's a million desires that the content creator is trying to balance between their ethical responsibilities and their desire for success. And they're trying to balance that. And then the publisher obviously wants the largest reach and most positive impact they can have. There are different parts of this machine at play. They are not necessarily a problem, because the practical reality is being a part of the marketing machine, putting out videos, in other words, talking about the new things. The audience, for the most part, you primarily do want information on new things. You want information on new games, because how else? I mean, you can just buy whatever's new, or you could look for information, and information could be anything from gameplays, how to plays, previews, reviews, but it's information about the game. Talking about new stuff is something that, in general, the board game audience wants. You seek out those videos. This is proven time and time again by the nature of the fact that older videos of older coverage don't do as well as newer videos and newer coverage. There's more of a desire, more of an audience, more eyeballs for the new thing. And very often, the way content creators can get their hands on the new thing is by having the publisher send them that new thing. So the publishers are happy, the content creator's happy, the audience is happy, in theory. The audience gets less happy when they feel like every single review is just a positive spin on every single thing, and everything is no longer a review. It's just 15 videos telling you about how amazing the game is, and there's not a single dash of critical anything left, right, and center. The audience understandably gets less happy with that. And this is where we've talked about this in the past, or I've talked about this in the past, about the nature of why negative content is less frequent. Negative content will be less frequent in the ecosystem as a whole. It will be less frequent in my content. And in general, no matter what channel you are, content drifts more towards the positive, and there's a variety of reasons for that, and I'll just go into them very shortly, very in brief. This video is not going to be 10 minutes long. First of all, very often, games are good. More often than not, games are good. I try to say no to as many games as possible. By the time a game enters my doorsteps, I've filtered it out to be something that I am interested in and I believe has a reasonable chance of being good. Now, good is different than great, to be very clear. That's why the most common rating on my channel is a 3.5. A 3.5 to me, that specific rating indicator out of 5, is a game that I enjoyed. I kind of wish I could play it more, but practically speaking, I have too many games, and so I can't play it more. 3s are good games that I won't really think about that much. 2.5s already start drifting towards bad. A 4 is a much better game. 4.5s and 5s are already games that are almost always in my collection. And so that does mean, I think I have a child wandering downstairs, so you may have to wait a minute as I deal with the interruption. But that does mean that when you're engaging... Sorry about this. What's up, buddy?
We have another game at this game upstairs.
We do, but right now I'm filming. Do you see the light on?
Mm-hmm.
Could you go back upstairs? How about when I'm done filming? Thank you. Alright, upstairs. We didn't do the pirate game. Throws a wrench into my monologue there. Anyways, as I was saying, most games are good. Most games are good. Most games are enjoyable. That is the nature of the board game space that we are in. If you are in any way filtering the types of games you cover, most games are good. It doesn't mean all games are good, but it does mean that most content will represent a game that is good, and then from there it's a question of how good. Good, great, amazing, those are different scales. And then how many criticisms are there. But past that, there's also the fact that some people don't like doing negative content. Some people just don't want to sit there and be on a channel and sit there and say, I didn't like this, this, or this, especially knowing that there are relationships at play. And I don't mean the financial incentive. I mean, you just know the person or the company that gave you the game. They said, hey, sure, we trust you with this game, and you just don't want to be negative. And so some channels will only do positive content. They hopefully don't call them... There's a balance between calling something a review. If you're putting out things that are called reviews and you're only doing positive content, I do believe to a certain degree it's a disservice to the audience to call it a review and only cover the positives. I don't want to trash other content creators at all, but I do think that that is a borderline area, because If you want to call it a preview, sure. If you just want to talk about the game, sure. But if you call it a review and you only cover the positives, I think that is doing a disservice because it implies that you're willing to cover the negatives by calling it a review. That's my own 2 cents. But again, keep in mind, I'm sure other content creators disagree with the way I do things too. So take it as a minor 2 cents, not as a giant anything. But some people don't want to be negative. Being negative isn't always fun. And then a big part of it I talked about a lot is when you do play games that aren't great, very often the audience, understandably, wants you to play games more than once before reviewing them. Understandably, that is a good and reasonable thing. Which also means that if you want negative coverage and you want the content creator to play it more than once, you are effectively saying, hey, I know you didn't like this. Can you play it like 2 or 3 more times, the game that you didn't like, so that you can then go on video and say that you didn't like it in a way that will also still get pushback, by the way. Something Tom Vassell has talked about, I've talked about, it's a common thing. Negative content is usually the most sought out and also gets the most pushback. You played it wrong. You played with the wrong group of people. You didn't understand that factor. You want negative content, but I should say the audience wants negative content, but then large segments within that audience will push back against negative content. So if you're wondering why the board game space in general shifts towards a bit more positivity, there are a variety of reasons all combining. And yes, one of those reasons is also bias. Whether it's bias because you want to curry favor with the company, or whether it's bias because you are literally cashing a check from that company, bias does exist and is a factor. But it's one of many factors that are at play as far as why the content space does drift more positive. Now that does mean you are to a certain extent getting a lot of marketing, but you're not necessarily getting that marketing from anything nefarious. Very often you're getting that marketing from passion around the hobby, from people who love the games they're talking about, and they want to communicate that to you. For most people in this space, there's not enough money in this space for people to do these things unless they love what they do. They're not cashing giant checks. No one here is cashing giant checks as far as just being able to make bank on this industry. If you are here, it is probably because to some extent you love the industry, especially smaller channels. You want to look at the top 5 or 6 channels in the space, fine, there's at least a paycheck there. But most channels are operating with very little money and a whole lot of passion, and that is just not worth, it's not worth getting lost in and losing your love for the hobby for something like that. So I guess the short summary there, I'm going to talk about my own content after and then a further summary, but the short summary there is board game content creation is inherently a marketing machine. Any content creation is to an extent. Hopefully there is enough of a mutual beneficial structure going around that it can be handled in a way that is good for the audience, good for the content creator, and good for the publisher. There are inherently conflicts in making that all work, and it's up to the content creators to try to juggle those conflicts and present them as ideally as possible, and it's up to the audience to decide whether they like what that content creator is doing. At the end of the day, the biggest summary I can give here is that you have to acknowledge that as someone who's watching board game content creators, you are inherently being shown the newest stuff. Very often the publisher has a hand in why you're being shown that newest stuff because they send those things to content creators. Not always. I would say about half the games I cover are games I paid for, and about half of them are games I got sent. But any different content creator is going to be getting games from publishers and covering those games. That is part of the equation. It is up to you to decide what you get out of each content creator, how much they align with their tastes, how much do you trust their opinion if they're giving a review, and ultimately whether you want to be signing up to be shown the new things, because that is where the eyeballs are. That is where the views are. I will show you the newest games that come out, not because the publisher is pushing down on me. When I get sent a game from a publisher, just for the record, if I get sent a game, let's look at a game on my shelf. What do I have right there? I don't even know. What do I have? I have a Sabaca. Sabaca is a game on my shelf. Published it to me a few months ago. I haven't covered it yet. But very often when I'm making a decision about what to cover with the highest urgency, I do so not based on the publisher sending me the game, but based on what I think the audience most wants to see. I'm doing so based on what I think the audience wants and not what the publisher wants. They often are aligned because new stuff is good for the audience and good for the publisher, and therefore, if it gets eyeballs, it's also good for my channel. So you have to decide what you're getting out of it. And you have to curate your content creators that you watch accordingly. And if you don't find you're getting value from a content creator, unsubscribe. That includes me. That includes me, and it's not said with any malice. It means that whatever the type of content a person is presenting, they're doing so in a way that is good for them and hopefully good for you. And if it's not good for you, don't watch it, I guess. Which brings you to my type of content, the types of content I put on the channel and my general look on things, because some content I do is more marketing than others. Because I do different kinds of things. I do topical discussions, which are never marketing of any kind. I'd have to look through every single one, but if I'm talking about, my opinion on a segment of the hobby, it is rarely ever, I guess, this conversation right now is a topical conversation. There's no marketing here. There's nothing going on at all. It's usually something about the hobby and in no way is any form of marketing. Then there's reviews. Reviews make me a part of the marketing machine, but I always aim to be critical in my reviews. If you watch my coverage, you'll see that I put in every single review, the things I don't like, the things I can see others not liking, and my most common rating is a 3.5 out of 5. That's a 7 out of 10. And for the record, in general, my recommendation is to not get a 7 out of 10, to not get a 3.5 out of 5. There are so many amazing games, why would you buy the 3.5s out of 5s? Good is not great, but good is still good. It still has a meaning attached to the rating, and there are so many games that I enjoy. The 3.5s, I want to keep and play every single 3.5. But I don't because I prefer the 4s and the 4.5s and the 5s over those, and so very often I don't keep the 3.5s, so if I keep them, it's usually temporary until I've explored them enough. A 3.5 is a testament that this is a good game that I enjoyed. It does not mean get it, it does not mean keep it. I say that all the time. Then there's preview content. Preview content is something that Devin is currently doing on the channel. There's like 4 or 5 videos so far. In general, preview content is inherently part of the marketing machine. That is where I, or Board Game Co., is cashing a check from a publisher to showcase their game without an opinion on the game. That is something we do now. It's something we started doing a month or two ago. The introduction of Devin and Meg to the channel has been great in many ways, but also introduces additional cost to the channel, and I've started doing preview content to balance that out, as long as I'm not the one handling the game. It's a separation some will be okay with, some will not be. I respect that either way. But in general, preview content is 100% a marketing machine thing. What I will say is we still turn down plenty of paid opportunities. In general, when Devin and I are making decisions, right now Devin is the one who's primarily doing the preview content, Meg might be doing it as well, but in general, when Devin and I are making decisions around what to take, some things don't even get to Devin, I just say no, and then anything I'm kind of okay with, I send to Devin and ask if he's comfortable covering. We still want to ensure that even if we're presenting something without an opinion, we still want it to at least seem like it has a chance of being a good game, because we don't want to just showcase things that aren't fun. And so there's no guarantee of anything there because we're just trying our best there, but we are selective with the types of content we take on, and that content will be given without an opinion, but with a sense of how it plays, how it feels, and it is 100% part of the marketing machine. A check was cashed. Take that into account when you watch it. Hopefully you're getting an informational overview without an opinion attached to it. I do unboxings. Unboxings are a little borderline. Unboxings I do because I like talking about games. I like talking about the nature of an unboxing and rambling and all that stuff, and I enjoy that process. But yes, it is also me going through 15 boxes of miniatures and fun things, and again, half the time I paid for it and half the time I was sent it. Those are part of the conversation. In general, something you should know is I never ask for a game, or I try not to accept games that I wouldn't have paid for myself. So nearly every unboxing, there's a handful of exceptions out there. There's a handful of exceptions of unboxings where, where I got the game, where I didn't back it, didn't necessarily want it, didn't ask for it. There are a handful of exceptions, but for the most part, they are games that I am interested in and I think are very cool and I want to show them, but they are very much, they're not even a review of the game. They're just me showing you hordes of plastic, and that is marketing. Now, I'm not doing it with the goal of marketing. I'm doing it because I love the hobby and I like these things, but there is a degree of, hey, look, shiny plastic, and not even a review of the game. So those definitely fall a bit more towards, like, I guarantee you publishers are happy to send me big box miniature games knowing that I'll unbox it and they'll get views and attention from it. I guarantee you they're fine with that trade-off. And so that does make me part of the marketing machine, especially when it comes to unboxings. My board game upgrade videos. That's a once-a-month sponsored segment from Top Shelf Gamer where I showcase upgraded stuff and content for games. Things that I try to showcase things that I am interested in or I want to cover, but in general, because I do want content for that series, I do cover things, even if they're not necessarily as functional, but I do tell you about the upsides and downsides. But again, definitely like the unboxings, just a bit more towards marketing. Top 10 lists. I'm sure publishers are happy to have their games in top 10 lists. I have never once taken on a game to put in, like I got a comment one time in a video where I did 15 games. I can't remember, I don't remember which list it was, but at one point I did a video of like some sort of top 10 list like a few months ago, and someone asked how much a publisher paid to have their game featured. And I was like, nothing. I have never once accepted a game to go into a top 10 list of any kind in any way. If I take a game from a publisher, the only commitment I'm giving the publisher is they will get some sort of review-based content around that game. That means either a dedicated review or alternatively some kind of like, hey, here's 5 games that were okay, or whatever it was, like a roundup review. So roundup reviews, yes, that's where a game will be featured that was sent. But I've never once agreed to feature a game in a top 10 list for any reason whatsoever. Top 10 lists of any kind, whether it's top best 10 art, whether it's my top 100 games of all time, whatever it is, those are things I throw together. And yes, there is marketing value attached to the things that I showcase, but there's no cooperation, communication, or expectation for publishers when I do so, none whatsoever. Then from there we have Kickstarter Roundup videos. That's where every Monday I do Kickstarter Roundups, or crowdfunding Roundups I should say, where I cover Kickstarters, game pounds, back kits, all that. Again, publishers have no say what happens there. Now, is there potential bias if I was reviewing a game and also talk about it? Of course there's potential bias, but what I will say there is, if you watch my content, the amount of times I've liked a game and said it's not a good back, it's happened so frequently that if you think there's bias, no, there is bias, but if you think the bias is affecting the outcome, there's not much I can do. Hopefully my words speak for themselves there. And then lastly, this game's leaving the collection video. Now, this is a series I've talked about in the past. This one gets me in trouble on a regular basis because I'll sit there and review a game and I'll be like, it's a 3.5, and then it goes away. And there is that dichotomy of like, oh my gosh, like he seemed to like the game, but it went away. That's because I cover 250 plus games a year. I review 5 games a week. That's 250 games a year. That's not even counting the ones that don't get reviewed. So I play around 300 to 350 new games a year. That does mean that I can't keep most of those games even when I enjoy them. I've said already a 3.5 is my most common rating, and those don't stay for the most part. For the most part, a 3.5 does not stay. Even 4s don't always stay, because a 4 in the genre of area control, or a 4 in the genre of midweight Euro, they're just fighting against 4.5s and 5s, and so they're not going to stick around. And so there is that, what's the word for it? There's a term where you have a, not dichotomy, but there's a term where there's a disconnect. And there's that disconnect as a viewer when you see me rate something a 4, and then a month later it's leaving the collection. And it comes across as all hype, all buzz, or whatever. And I almost stopped doing this series of games leaving the collection because of that disconnect, because of that fact that that has been a problem. But ultimately I chose to, based on feedback, I chose to keep that series because I'd rather cater to the people who are here on a regular basis who value the content than the person who is not necessarily here on a regular basis and doesn't value the content as much. And so that is the balance there. But I recognize that games leaving the collection, as much as it is negative or a reality check, it's not really negative, but more of a reality check of what will and won't stay, that has definitely thrown, again, that disconnect between, hey, you really seem to like the game, and now it's going. Yes, that will happen. And then lastly, on a personal note, I'll say that when it comes to sponsorships, you may have seen sponsorships for various things over the years. You've seen sponsorships for, GameFound games, for board game tables, for Audible. What you don't see is the sponsorships I turn down. I turn sponsorships down on a regular basis. I've gotten multiple. Just last week, I got a sponsorship offer for a VPN, VPNs, virtual private networks or whatnot. And I turn those down on a regular basis. I turn down anything that I don't feel I believe in. If I believe in something, if I think I like it, or if I think it has value, I will happily, take on a sponsorship opportunity. Like, I love board game tables in general. I think board game tables are a great asset to a collection. They're expensive, but I think that they really help play games. And so I've covered those extensively. Audible is a service I genuinely use. I use Audible when I'm traveling, and I use it to listen to books. And so I'm happy to cash a check and talk about how I like Audible. But I turn down opportunities for things that aren't a match for me because it's the same balance as always. There's a fine line when you are an influencer. There's a fine line to be covered. And I try to do my best to balance that line. And there are things that you'll do that will make people unhappy. No matter what, you'll never make everyone happy, and I respect that. And I appreciate all of you for being here, because ultimately you are the target audience. The people who have made it the 19 minutes or so into this video, you are the target audience that I'm trying to cater to. You are the ones who see the benefit of what I do and appreciate the content I put out, and I want to cater my content towards that. And so I try to make the choices I can make that seem like the right choices. I will never make everyone happy, but I will try to make as many happy as I can. And to me, that means that when it comes to sponsorship opportunities, or any opportunities, I try to be as genuine as possible. I try to only do things that I'm comfortable with. The same way I can't sit there and seriously on a channel and talk about how a VPN, a virtual private network, is something I believe in. Because I can talk about the merits. I've watched enough YouTubers, but I don't actually use them. So and I actually had one. I had one for 3 years, and I used it for the first, because I bought one from a YouTuber's recommendation, and I used it for the first few months and then stopped using it for the next, 2.5 years. So I can't talk seriously about how they're amazing and incredible and will help you watch Netflix in another country. I could give you the pitch, but I wouldn't believe in the pitch. And if I'm not going to believe in the thing that I'm selling, I don't want to sell it. Because I recognize that I'm a part of the marketing machine, but I only want to talk about things I believe in. which, by the way, is why you should get an Ember mug. Ember mugs are fantastic. They have not agreed to sponsor me, unfortunately. I've emailed them. I've reached out. I want them to write me a check because I keep talking about Ember mugs, but they're fantastic. And so I'm going to keep telling you that Ember mugs are fantastic. They're expensive, but they will make your coffee experience much, much better. I guess not the best choice to end off a video, but being a part of the marketing machine by telling you to buy a $100 coffee mug. But at least I'm not getting paid for that, so there is that. In any case, I hope you found this video in some way helpful and informative. This might be doubling up on the content from the other video, but this one I actually had. Going back to my other point, if you watch the other video, you'll see I start off by showing you I don't have cliff notes for that video. These were my cliff notes for this video. These are my bullet points that I covered for this video because this one I did structure it out. I wanted to approach the conversation, making sure I cover all the bases. There's going to be a lot of overlap with that second video. If you watch the second video, it's another 30 minutes of me talking about this, but a bit more emotionally charged and a bit less structured. Maybe you'll watch both. Maybe you'll watch neither. Well, if you watched neither, you didn't get to this part either, so there's that. I'm going to wrap this up. This is definitely more than the 10 to 15 minutes I told you it would be, but I also kind of knew that would happen. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for being here, genuinely. I'm very grateful for all of you, and it's hard sometimes to hop onto a thread of people who don't like you and to remember that that's the thing you need to tune out, and you need to remember to focus on. The thread wasn't about me, to be clear. The thread was not, I came up in the thread, but it was not about me. But you have to mentally remind yourself that the people who I should value are the people who value me. That the energy I should be giving are to the people who give me their energy, and not to the people who are there to just detract and get in the way. And so, genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for allowing me to live a life I never thought possible, to be in a space I love, and to be able to make a living and an income in a hobby that I've loved for the past 12 years. So thank you for that. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.